Hello and welcome. I am Razia. On today's video, this is a theory video, and it's about whether or not the Emperor had a second stage for Astartes and Primarchs. We see how they look in the books. They are superhumans, tall, in their power armor, the best of humanity can create, but maybe they had this second stage that we don't know about, but maybe hinted at. And I think the biggest hints we see are with the Blood Angels and the Space Wolves. Now, this is the thing about it. The Wulfen are very interesting because they are Space Wolves that went into the warp and got changed by the warp. Yes, the warp changes everything, as we know. The warp being this great big Deus Ex Mechanicum that can do anything that the writer wishes it to do. Planet of Skulls? Check. Demon the size of the planet? Check. Orcs being reincarnated and brought alive every single day just so Khorne can watch them fight more demons? Check. I mean, whatever the writer deems the warp can do. And I mean, it can be fun in some ways, but I do think limits needs to be put on. But we are talking about the Wulfen here. And the Wulfen are this nice in-between between Legionnaire, Space Wolf Legionnaire, and their full werewolf form. Now, the thing is about the 13th Company, they did go into warp completely unguarded from, the warp itself when they were fighting on demon planets from anything like Gellerfields to fight. And now they come out this nice, like I said, halfway point between Legionnaire and werewolf. And that is part of the Space Wolves' gene flaw, is that they could end up as werewolves. We have seen this in some books, and it's not really shown as much of an issue, mainly because Space Wolves kind of encourage this, weirdly. By part of their training, they have to drink a brew or mead which has the Canis Helix in it, which can kind of make their gene flaw more prominent, and therefore turning the neophyte, scout, whatever, into a werewolf. And so, this is the thing. They went in as Legionnaires and came out as Wulfen. Now, I was trying to think out why this would be. Like, this is something that was bothering me. Why this halfway point? I mean, they were in the warp, and we know what the warp can do. But then I was thinking, hang about, there's lots of Chaos Space Marines, traitor Space Marines within the warp, again, completely unaffected by the warp. They might get some nerfs or the odd eyeball, but nothing so egregious as in to have this full bodily change. We, again, like if you read the Alpha Legion book, we learn about one of them having been tainted by the warp because he has an eyeball on his back. It's nothing major and it's easily covered up. But they said, look, a psycho can sense the smell of the taint of warp upon you. Will be found out, will be discovered. An Alpha Legion being as secretive, that's not what they want. So, was there this second stage of the Emperor's plan to allow the Astartes to morph into something far more powerful, something greater, something stronger, to take on the warp? And when you take on the warp, you have to be prepared, not just physically, but spiritually and mentally as well, because the stuff you're going to see there is going to drive you bananas. Even before the warp touches you, it's absolutely mental, to the point that a lot of ships, inquisitorial ships, will shutter down windows, like they'll go completely dark, no light, they can't see outside the windows, because the warp will just drive them mad. Mainly because it is mad and full of contradictions. It itself is a contradiction, but this makes sense because the warp is driven by emotions, and emotions are contradictory at the best of times. You can be happy about something very tragic, I know, slightly psychopathic, or something really comedic. There's nothing to tell you what you can and can't be happy about, or what brings you joy. Same with sadness. You can see something that's really good that can make you cry, or you can see something really sad that makes you cry too. Emotions are emotions. We can't control them, and they are a contradiction, as with everything else in the warp. It doesn't make sense. So, what about the Wulfen? Again, why wouldn't they turned into these squibbly beasts? Well, first let's look at the Chaos Space Marines that live within the warp. Things like the Khorne Berserkers, Emperor's Children, the Word Bearers, all of these worship gods. And the gods don't really want to nerf their armies that much. the odd champion becoming the Chaos Spawn, that's a reasonable collateral damage for them. But if they turn them all into super powerful demon princes, all of a sudden they're going to lose a lot of worshipping power, a lot of power from worship, I should say. And this doesn't help them at all. All demons, including demon princes, have their power derived from the god itself. And if it was to worship that god it got its power from, and it's now a slave to, actually being part of the god's physicality, it's going to be like, eating your hand and eating an apple. Your hand is going to need to repair itself, it's going to need to fix itself and replace the power that it's lost, as well as from the nutrients from your hand. And the apple is going to provide more nutrients, but isn't going to need repair. You're not going to repair yourself from eating something externally. So this is kind of the way worship works within chaos. And we see this all the time, which is why Typhus is considered higher up in the hierarchy and more beloved by Nurgle prior to Mortarian's big mistake than Mortarian. Because Typhus is choosing to worship him, it's a choice from him. He's not a slave to Nurgle, he can give up worship, he will get backlash and will obviously suffer for it, but it's a choice that he can make and he can refuse to worship him. However, Mortarian doesn't have that choice, he has to worship Nurgle because he is part of Nurgle. That's basic, just very simplified reductive argument there, that's all it is. Anyway, so back to the wulfen. So what made them change? Well, the warp made them change, as quite easily surmised, and we can't really argue that. But why didn't they change fully into werewolves? Now, I think what we got to do is look at the blood angels for this. And I know it sounds weird, because I was thinking maybe they weren't changed because of the worship of the Emperor. But they were Horus Heresy, scouring early Space Marines. They didn't worship the Emperor. They weren't followers of that, that tenet. A lot of them still believed that the Emperor and knew the Emperor was a man and didn't want to be worshipped as the god. They believed that, so they didn't do it. So it can't be the worship of the Emperor. So now let's jump over to the Blood Angels and their Black Rage. Now, it said this was triggered because of the death of Sanguinius. Now, I'm thinking maybe, yes, it was triggered by the death of Sanguinius, but it was always meant to be triggered by Sanguinius. It was meant to be something that happened anyway, but Sanguinius had to be alive. The Black Rage makes a Blood Angel stronger, but also ends up changing their body and their physicality to this more bestial nature. They become really strong, they don't use weapons, they're mad in close combat, but they are physically changed. We see this in Blood Quest, and we also see this in the Devastation of Bao. When they go so far, they are no longer considered, they don't even look like Space Marines anymore, they're completely different. Ape-like in nature, I believe is the term that was used, but they do change. And I was just thinking, that's why. But they're completely berserk. See, while the wulfen are berserk, they are still free thinking. Because when they changed and when they became the wulfen, Leman Russ was still with them. And with Leman Russ, their Primarch still being with them, meant their change was controlled and monitored, and it was his power that managed to keep them from going completely off the rails. They do go off the rails still, when they're in the material universe, but Leman Russ being there kind of helped it. So I have this theory that Sanguinius, if he was alive, the Black Rage would have still triggered and would have changed the Blood Angels into this bestial nature, but they wouldn't be so mindless. And then I was thinking, why would this be? Why would you have these Space Marines suddenly change to become stronger into these more bestial natures? Wouldn't that scare people? Wouldn't that scare your Imperial citizens? And I was thinking, what if it wasn't there for the Imperial citizens to see? What if it was there for another reason? And I realised, even if the Emperor removed all worship of Chaos Gods from the galaxy, the Great Crusade was completely successful, the Chaos God would still exist. They'd be weakened, they'd be not as strong, and they wouldn't be as much as a threat, but they would still be there. And to finally kill the Chaos Gods, the Emperor would have to take it to their territory. They'd have to go into the warp themselves. The Astartes would have to go in there, in the warp, and fight demons on their home turf. If their mortal shells couldn't cope with the change, or the warp itself, he would lose everyone straight away. And if they didn't come out alive, if they never survived, Chaos would suddenly get a massive boost of strength, and everything would go back, and the Emperor's plan would be for nothing at all. But now if you send Astartes in there, who can be changed by the warp to a point where they are stronger, but no longer affected by the warp, you now have warriors that can fight inside the warp. And what really sort of nailed this home for me, and really spent, this is probably the plan, is Corvus Corax himself fighting the word bearers within the warp, because he says to, I think it was to maybe Lorga or Erebus, and said, I have not changed. This is what I was always meant to be. This big flock of seagulls. And I was thinking, that makes so much sense, and I kind of bothers me. This was actually Gav Thorpe that came up with this, and actually works. That if the Primarchs went in, then all of a sudden they'd have this new stronger power. They'd be able to defeat Chaos because they would be stronger, almost on Demon Primarch level within the warp themselves. And that just would be bothersome for the Chaos Gods. They wouldn't be able to hold back because their power wouldn't be able to affect as much as the Space Marines, because the warp's already got to a point where they are exactly what they need to be. But Emperor genetically probably designed it that way. And there is theories that, of course, the gene seed comes from warp magic anyway. That's what causes the change. These are gene flaws. These are the issues that come in because of their gene seed, not because of any other reason. And this warp power suddenly just makes them stronger. And now they are no longer affected by the warp, and the Emperor can take the war to the Chaos Gods themselves and finally defeat Chaos. Because just defeating them in the galaxy was just one part of the plan. He needed to take it to them too. Well, that's my theory. What do you guys think? It's not, I know it's a bit of headcanon here, and I try to show my points and my working out here as well. Things like Sanguinius, it was him that triggered the Black Rage with his death. Maybe he was always meant to trigger it, but in a controlled manner. Make it when they're in the warp. Warp powers, the warp does make Psychers infinitely more powerful within the warp. So any psychic power he had suddenly would have become so much stronger, including the triggering of the Black Rage. Maybe that's what happened with Leman Russ, the triggering of the Wulfen. Basically, he triggered it, didn't realise he triggered it, but it was a controlled manner, but it was controlled. And him being alive meant the Wulfen never lost their senses to such a degree that the Black Rage loses, the Death Company loses theirs to the Black Rage. Anyway, like I said, what do you guys think? Is this an interesting theory? And, well, I'd like to hear your thoughts, always do. And I'll see you all in the next one. Links down below to Whaling Games, as always, up to 20% off your Warhammer and free delivery after £20. There is for Whaling Planet for your comics, DVDs, manga, etc, etc, etc. My merchandise, t-shirts, comics, and I might be bringing up memberships soon, but I'm on the fence about that, to be honest with you. To me, it's like Patreon. I don't really want you guys just to give me money, and if I did, it would only be the $2.99 bare minimum. I won't do anything else, and you only just get probably some emojis out of it, to be honest with you, and nothing more. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you all again in the next one. Bye bye.